The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me on this Monday evening. This is our Thanksgiving week, and it's going to be a short one for us. We'll get into that in a little bit. I hope everyone had a great weekend. I had a pretty good one, and last night, well, it started in the afternoon, actually. I went with a friend, and we went out to eat at a nice restaurant and had some nice pasta and all that sort of thing, and we got to talking. And about 5 hours later, literally 5 hours later, still at this restaurant, we're just like, I'm kind of hungry for dinner now. So we ended up going to a second restaurant, of course, as one does. And we ended up closing that place out as well. So that was a lot of fun. It's always nice to catch up. And, the conversations often are one of ghosts and spirits and that sort of thing. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. And perhaps also not much of a surprise is one of my other loves. And I've talked about it multiple times on this program. I've been on other programs on AM 950 talking about it as well. And that is my love for my show, Doctor Who. And Saturday, the 23rd of November, celebrated the 61st anniversary of this amazing series. It still goes on to this day, and I started watching it back in 1984, and it's something that's been with me for a long time. And what we're going to do today, and I wanted to take a different sort of slant talking about it. A lot of times we'll come on and we'll talk about the stories or the people who played the Doctor. Something I find very interesting is that there is also just the props and the stuff used to create this series. And once again, the series started 61 years ago. So what exists? And I would argue to anyone who has any fleeting passing interest in television production, you have a favorite show from the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, whatever, and there's, iconic props in there, whatever. What has happened to those? So we're not going to be able to answer those questions, but we can answer some of the questions when it's in regards to Doctor Who. And so someone who I've been seeing on Facebook way out in the UK, so I don't get out there as much as I used to. Neil Cole is the creator and curator of the Museum of Classic Sci-Fi, and there has a very large Doctor Who exhibit. I'm not going to even say it right. So, once we get Neil on, we're going to talk about exactly what it is, because it's clearly a life work. It is clearly something that is very important to him. And, as it happens to a lot of us, it's very important to us. Even if I'm not able to get out there and see it, knowing that it exists here in Minnesota is enough for me for the time being until I'm able to get out there and check it out for myself. Neil Cole, welcome to GhostBox Radio.
Hello, Greg. Thank you ever so much for having me on. And yes, I am sitting as we speak in the history, the remnants of the classic era of Doctor Who, which has been my passion for since I was a little child. It never went away.
When did you start? When did you get involved with just even watching the series?
Oh, I quite clearly. We live near somewhere called the Lake District, which in the UK is a massive beauty spot. Mm-hmm. And I was in a pub with my dad, and we were playing. Dad was playing darts, and on the telly was The Green Death with John Pertwee. Oh. And I clearly remember seeing the maggots, and then So I remember the end of John Pertwee, 74, and then by 1975, I was absolutely all in there. And in 75, I went to the Blackpool Doctor Who exhibition, which was the BBC's annual exhibition of Doctor Who props and costumes, straight from the set, straight from that year's production. And I'm telling you, at that time, this was pre a lot of the theme parks that we have now and take for granted. And you went from a summer's day on the pier in this seaside resort, sticks of rock, and you went, there was the TARDIS. You went downstairs and there was this year's Zygon, there was Davros, there was all these things straight from the telly. And it was in an era where there was no way of seeing these things again. You couldn't see the programs again. You couldn't even get a photograph of some of these things again. And there they were. And that blew my 5-year-old brain.
Well, and
away.
and for the thing too that I don't know if a lot of people in the U.S. would quite understand, especially since Doctor Who in the 80s in particular had a very healthy run of a continual run of stories, but especially the period of time you're talking about, really till the end of the classic series run, that there wasn't. There would be in-season repeats of a story or two, but it wouldn't be like you get through a season and then you do a complete repeat of that season. There is stuff that, like you said, Neil, that you would not have seen again for quite some time, and probably at that age, probably just assumed that you would not see again.
Oh, absolutely. You never thought you were ever going to see this stuff again. When I was a teenager, I think it was in about 1985. I remember the two doctors and Colin Baker was in. At that point, it was honestly, if you caught a clip from an earlier Doctor Who show, it was like the talk of talking about. Did you see? The second Doctor. Was that the second Doctor? It was that level of excitement,
right?
And I remember in the late 80s when the VHS range started. That was remarkable, because I honestly, it's hard to explain the culture difference before pre-recorded media. It's really difficult to explain. You were in the hands of the broadcaster. I've actually just written a book actually called It Belongs in a Museum, and it deals with all this and why the BBC couldn't repeat a lot of these things. There was various reasons why. It was quite a complicated process, but so yeah, you'd be lucky. There was a handful over, say, 20 years of program making. Probably just a handful that were ever repeated in that time period.
It's incredible, and I do know a lot of my UK friends of the age that the seminal moment of their Doctor Who lives would have been the Five Faces of Doctor Who.
Oh, I could remember very well. It was to see an Ice Warrior. I remember Ice Warrior Crotons.
Yeah,
amazing, just amazing. Yeah, happy days.
And for those who don't know, and I wouldn't expect anyone to. Like we said, there was no repeats of anything. So, no. Especially, say, Neil seeing Doctor Who in 1973 as a 5-year-old, going back, or whatever age, going back to 1963, wasn't born yet, but may have always wondered what the original stories looked like. There were no repeats. The BBC Two, to be perfectly clear, did a run of stories that featured a story from each Doctor up to that point, and An Unearthly Child, which is the very first Doctor Who story. That seemed at the time probably was as close to a holy grail as you could want.
It was remarkable. I think the key milestones for me were, beyond television, were the Target books, where you could at least read the stories, and they were like grail pieces. There wasn't even any, for me, living in the countryside, I didn't even have contacts to mail order. So it was a question of what did my rural small shops get in? Mm-hmm. Maybe a copy of this. I didn't even know how to order anything. And then one of the biggest books for me was in my newsagent, of all places, randomly appeared, was the Doctor Who Monster book, about 75. And that had actual photographs in of Davros, of all the key monsters. And that just, because of the nature of those photographs, it, if anything, made them look even better again, and even more mysterious, and even more elusive, and more wonderful. So it amplified this desire and this interest in this show even more,
My first time that the first Doctor Who convention I ever went to was Doctor Who Fan Club of America in 1987. They were big, and the Doctor Who Appreciation Society tried to get in over in the U.S., but it didn't quite work. But the DWFCA was here, and they brought in Louise Jameson, and that was very exciting. But one thing that I remember is waiting in line to get her autograph and meet her. It was kind of this, kind of go through this corridor, and one of the halls was all these masks from the series. And the ones I remember, there was like maybe 2 or 3 from the story Robots of Death, which is for those who don't know, is one of the great stories. There's many great stories, but also one of those great iconic looks. And that was the first thing that I had ever, that really helped me cement for me the idea of, do props exist from this series? How did they get over to US? But also, what exists, what doesn't exist. And here you are, all of these, years later. Where did your desire to take it a step deeper and get into the actual the prop side, when did that really hit you?
Well, I think it did start with that visit to Blackpool in 75, age 5. That made me realize, even though I couldn't fully comprehend it, that there was practical, real objects. In other words, the Daleks actually did exist in corporeal form. Right. They were actually physical objects. And then as I got older, obviously I knew the exhibitions were going on. I had so little money as a child. I came from a pretty poor background. I didn't have very much. We didn't go out. We didn't get away very much. I didn't get to see any more exhibits till I could drive, really in my late 20s when I was a teacher by then. I also knew in 1990 that there was the famous Bonhams auction, which was it was on a TV show called Blue Peter. Yep. And suddenly all these props came on, and they were selling them off. And I was a student then, and I thought, well, I can't even afford the catalogue, let alone a prop. And do you remember Planet of Fire and there's the Sarn Dwellers? I thought, my God, I'd sell my left kidney just to get a Sarn Dwellers tea towel headdress, just to have one little thing. And I thought after that, big money's got it. That's it. It's all gone. And then as I became a teacher, sort of 10 years later, I think what I find is people buy these things. They take a lot of looking after. They also take up a lot of space. And then what do you do with it? And it's like, I think a lot of people started to get a bit older. They had these things and they started to come back onto the collector's market. And of course, the internet suddenly made a sort of a small town, sort of little Northumbrian idiot like me. I could actually suddenly connect broader. Do you know what I mean? And the first object I got for the museum, and I sold my motorbike. I had a motorbike which I was getting to work on. And it was Ohika's gown from The Brain of Morbius. And everyone was going, "You're selling your motorbike?" I was going, "Yep." And they were going, "You sell?" I went, "Yep, done, sold." And I got this gown. And of course, not a lot you can do with a gown. I could do quite a lot with my motorbike, i.e. get to work.
Right.
But hey, that motorbike will be rusting in some pit somewhere now. But the gown is, what it is. And I'm so glad I did. And that was the trigger point. I think after that, I was like, just started looking for them. And then I also realized that when I did find pieces, they were often in appalling condition. And I'm a sculptor and I've taught myself everything. So I'm an artist and sculptor, but I started to teach myself how to repair, particularly rubber. I mean, most of the monsters are rubber and they need tremendous amount of time. And it does make me cringe when I see people who've got far more money than me buy them, sort of waggle them online, go, "Look what I've got." And I'm going, "Yeah, but get some, oh God, seal it now, get it, support it underneath, get it in the dark, don't put it in that," and it's that sort of, they will just drop to bits. Simple as that. They
weren't meant to last much longer than the production, right?
No, they actually did. One of the best moments I've had here was a guy called Bob Richardson turned up one day earlier, last year, and Bob actually helped create the Blackpool exhibition I went to, and he said it was amazing. He said, "I young man, helped make the museum the exhibition that you were inspired by." And I was like, "What?" So anyway, we had a lovely morning, but he said they really were. There was, as the 1970s progressed, there was an understanding that we could actually get some more money out of these. Basically, we can get one exhibition. But he said literally we had a page of the script. We could go through the script. We were at the side of the set and we literally said, "Spaceship, right, highlight that, right, we'll have that. Master, oh yeah, that sounds good. What, a giant tree? Yeah, we'll have that." And they literally tea chest, newspaper, bunged them in a van. When you think about how carefully props and things need to be cared for, it is actually remarkable, really, that some of the things in here are still with us to put it mildly. It's quite amazing, really.
It is, and Bob Richardson worked, I think, for basically BBC Publicity, and had done a lot of. I mean, he's quite the name, and I mean his touch on BBC programs go far beyond Doctor Who. But yeah, totally a wonderful thing, and that is that. I mean, that's truly high praise indeed as well.
Oh, the other thing he said was interesting was that in the early exhibitions, I remember the coloured lights. Right?
Yeah.
You went downstairs from natural light and the seaside, right? And then you were in drenched primary colours and the radiophonic sound. It was like being on the planet of evil, or the Zygon spaceship.
Yep.
And that really made it better. And when I was talking to Bob, he said basically the lamps, the props look bloody awful, frankly, in daylight. They just weren't, they were brought together. But you light them right and they look fantastic. But he also said the lights that he used, it was just fascinating. They had huge old stage lights that really, at times, singed the props. They were so hot. And of course, he said, your lighting is far superior. And I went, really? I'm like trying to mimic what's in my head. But he said, no, what you've done, the lighting's gorgeous. He said, but of course, I said, well, you realize these are 1 watt, non-UV lamps, and they're no heat. And they're wonderful. I've been very lucky because if I'd built this 10 years earlier, I'd have still been on, halogens, and it would have been a nightmare. Whereas these are lovely. You could, it's very, very lucky for that.
Absolutely. Why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's take our first break. When we come back, what a great conversation. So much to talk about here. And I could already see that we're not going to get through everything because I'm already just...
Sorry, Greg.
Nope, I'm enjoying it. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the book, Greg, I've been doing, but that's all about this.
Greg Bakun here. I love historic tours of Minneapolis and seeing everything it has to offer. But if you know me, I like to include a little spooky in my tours, which is why I found the perfect combination. Minneapolis Trolley Tours does this amazing candlelight ghost tour that you have to check out. It's an extremely immersive experience. It's a trolley trip that starts out at a haunted mansion, traveling around Minneapolis locations exposing ghost stories that the public and business owners would rather left untold. Then a tour of the aforementioned haunted mansion where ghosts of past residents from the 1800s reside, plus a lot of surprises to discover. Next, experience Gertrude's After Hours. Did I mention Gertrude is the mansion's most famous ghost? Maybe she'll show up. And you finish up the tour at Gertrude's Lounge in the haunted basement of the mansion with refreshments and Q&A. The trolleys are climate controlled and the mansion is restored to perfection. Check out MinneapolisTrolleyTours.com for more information. Greg Bakun here. I've told you about the out-of-the-world roast beef sandwiches at Maverick's Real Roast Beef, but I haven't told you about their Philly steak sandwiches, turkey bacon avocado sandwich, BLT, crispy chicken, fish sandwiches, brisket, or pulled pork. Okay, you get the idea. They make a lot of delicious food to the same standard as their famous roast beef sandwiches, and now I'm starving. I'm going to go to Maverick's Real Roast Beef off Lexington and Roseville, and you need to go too. Check out their menu at mavericksbeef.com. What you wear is important. It should be fun, creative, and expressive of your own personality. At Grady Gear Company, we believe that clothing is more than just fabric and threads. It's a form of self-expression and a way to stand out from the crowd. Grady Gear is more than just a clothing brand. We're a community. We're here to inspire and motivate you to embrace your true self. We are a locally owned small business who do custom clothing orders too. Find us at GradyGearCompany.com. Have you ever met someone who not only can help you on a deep spiritual level, but also potentially change your life? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who travels the nation and lives right here in the Midwest. And she offers mediumship, mentorship, house and business parties, energy healing, palm readings, and so much more. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
Hi, this is Psychic Medium Deb. I cannot wait to hear from you. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
And welcome back to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Tonight is an episode of self-indulgence. I'm not going to lie. Doctor Who, the series, is very, very, very important to me. It's been a thrill to see that it has taken on a new life in terms since it's come back in 2005 and is very popular with a lot of people. A lot of children are loving it, and that makes me feel very good. But my love for Doctor Who really goes to what we call the classic series, which ran from 1963 to 1989. Some might throw in a Fox TV movie from 1996 into that mix as well. But this has been it's, you know, even 40 some years later from me for watching the first story, The Visitation, that's my first story. I never get tired of the show, and I love it. And I am so thrilled as I wanted to mark the 61st anniversary of my favorite show that brought on the creator of the Museum of Classic Sci-Fi, also the curator, Neil Cole. And we were talking about props and stuff. And one of the things that I'm very curious about, because there are so many props throughout the years, but as we talked in the last segment, they weren't originally meant to, you know, last. They were throwaways. They were, or maybe be reused or repurposed or whatever else. And Neil, I was curious, you know, do you have any line of sight into what might be some of the oldest stuff that exists from the series?
Well, Greg, first of all, The Visitation, just before I answer your question, I took 3 years restoring the only surviving pterodactyl, which is now in the museum, just for your information. And I adore that story. And it was like a real labor of love doing that one. Anyway, yes, old props, the history. Basically, I just researched a book for about 2 years. And I reached out to collectors all over the world and had photographs sent from objects from the Patrick Troughton era, 66 to 69.
Yeah.
And it's the first of a series of books called It Belongs in a Museum, because I honestly do think they do belong in a museum. I mean, I'm doing a museum here. My own feeling is the BBC should really be doing this museum, but, you know, it's up to idiots like me and enthusiasts like me to do this sort of stuff. But bottom line was, I thought the book, I would have loved to start with Hartnell, but I needed to create a book.
Yeah.
And I knew there was just so little from Hartnell. I mean, I've already, people are now sending me pictures now they've seen the first book, which is fantastic. But in terms of Hartnell and Troughton, it was. I thought I'll start with that because I knew I had a couple of things in the museum from Troughton, but I also was aware there was a few other things out there. Famously, the Weberfier Yeti that does the rounds. I think it's in New Zealand at the minute. It was refurbished a few years ago by Mike Tucker. That's been a perennial in the exhibitions. Now, again, it survived because of its exhibition life. So that's one of those. So there's various reasons why these props survived. Of course, material has a lot to do with it. But the key thing is, it's about storage, and it was about how the program was viewed. And it was about really one of the production managers of Doctor Who, a lovely lady called Margot Hayhoe, wrote the introduction of the book for me. And Margot worked with Hartnell, Troughton, Pertwee, Baker, and she finally left with Davison. And she went on to make Day of the Triffids, which is the BBC's excellent adaptation.
Love it, yeah.
And Margot came and gave a couple of chats at the museum. And she basically, when she wrote a foreword, she kind of summed it up really well. You know, people just, you know, most of it was either just going to be chucked, thrown away, or some of it would go back into storage if it was reusable. And then occasionally you'd keep the little keepsake. And she took one or two little keepsakes. And it wasn't like today where I know there's literally, they have to have security in place for people swiping stuff off Star Wars sets and things like that. These were really simple things. It might have just been a crew t-shirt. It might have just been a label, you know, a label that was going in the bin. Or do you mind if I just keep that little plate? Do you know? I mean, it's crazy as it is. And so Margot herself has a little keepsake. She couldn't find it. I remember she was saying, but this is a lot. And again, the special effects professionals, and again, the BBC effects department was very early, really still fledgling at that point. But again, they would be keeping pieces for their sort of own portfolio, if you like, of work. And it is just remarkable that anything survives. And again, storage is an issue because often things were not stored properly. So even if something went into storage, particularly fabrics, they end up becoming appallingly, you know, they deteriorate,
right.
You know. And you end up with this hodgepodge of items that were left. And and it's really actually so complicated when you've gone into it. It's quite remarkable. The one story I could find nothing for, absolutely zip, apart from a script. Every Doctor Who episode of the classic era has a surviving script, either a rehearsal or a camera script. But beyond that, the Crotons, which I love the Crotons, gets a lot of hammering by critics, but I think it's a great story. I thought surely somewhere there's a Croton out there, because fiberglass, big chunky monsters, there's got to be someone got a head or a bit of a Croton. Right. No, because I found out in my research, they were vac form plastic stuck onto wooden frames. And we all know vac form plastic, it'll have cracked over. And so there's nothing, as I know, I'd love someone to contact me and say, yes, I've got a Croton in the back garden. But the chances are, I think the Crotons, I couldn't find anything at all, which is really disappointing.
It is, because I swear I've seen pictures where there might have been one in an exhibition or some sort of fete or something like that.
There's quarks. There was a quark.
I bet that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that is, I can guarantee. I've actually managed to get photos of those exhibitions with the quark in the book. So, and in 1978, the Dwas in London, they had that quark. Now, it's already starting to get a little bit shoddy, but it's still together. Now, then after that, rumour has it that the head alone went to Longleat exhibition, and rumour still has it that exists somewhere. And a good friend of mine, Colin Young, he has the servo robot from Wheel in Space, and that's a hell of a piece. I mean, what a piece to have.
He must have bought that from Ian Levine, or
yeah, definitely, yeah, that's what happened. But there's things. It is a lottery what survived. Yeah. And one of the nice things was, as I was researching the book, I had one original Tomb Moonbase Cyberman helmet for the book. And suddenly somebody contacted me and said, I've got another one. So suddenly there was two in the book. And then suddenly, just as I've gone to print, another person from Australia went, I've got one. And I was like, I would have loved to have had the three. But what I've got is a double spread with the two in. But one has had the living daylights kicked out of it. It looks like it's been on a rugby pitch. And the other one is in pristine condition, which again, whatever happened, it looks like somebody's taken a chisel to one of them, but even so, it's still the original thing. It survived, which is quite remarkable.
Did, and at least one of the cyber controller helmets from Tomb exists, right?
Yeah, and its costume. I've got pictures of the costume. Again, a good friend of mine, Matt Doe, he very kindly supplied me with pictures of that. Yeah. So the costume survives, and the head had been separated, or heads. I can't remember. I think there was two. Yep. The heads had been separated, and they're in so Matt had to put an accurate from the original mold casting in, which was great to complete the outfit. The other, I'll tell you here. Okay, here's super nerd. You ready?
Oh, I was
very lucky to go out and have a few beers with the wonderful Robert Alsop, who made the Candyman, lots of wonderful costumes.
Nice. Yeah.
And he had, we were just sitting, literally, we were in a lock-in. It was about midnight, and he just said, "Neil, do you know what I've got?" And I'm, "What?" He said, "I've got the original mold." This is super nerd. You ready? I've got the original mold for the Roman helmets used in the war games.
Oh, wow. The final Patrick Troughton story. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just like, you've got the Roman helmet, of all the things to have, the Roman helmet mold. And I just thought, that's amazing. That's so weird. I guess it was probably kept because Roman helmets are sort of stock items, aren't they? Any films that were involving multitudes. So I can see why it survived. And then at the last minute, he said, I've also got the Clockwork Soldier head mold. And that picture of that's in the book. And again, I had no idea those things survived, at all.
No, and so like behind me, I have a cyber helmet, which is taken from
a very fine one.
Yeah, it's taken from the mold. I also have a total of 9 Cybermen helmets, and in the Tomb controller is taken from the original mold as well, and that's for those of you who are still hanging with me looking for paranormal to talk about tonight, and it's not happening. The thing about, and what Neil you probably don't know, is people who follow like Bigfoot and stuff, and you'll see the footprints in the sand and whatnot. People will take castings of that and then make it, and they'll trade them amongst each other or make copies of the casting of the feet. the footprints. And so it just for people to have an understanding, we know a lot of people who, and the names that you're mentioning, Neil, even though I'm in Minnesota, we hang around the same people. We know a lot of the same people. And like a lot of people, like friend of ours, Derek Hadley, who does the work on he gets the molds. He'll create molds and make costumes and stuff out of it. And it really is something. Now, so the book itself, and we'll talk more about the museum in general, but this is such a great book. It belongs in a museum, Searching for Treasures from Classic Doctor Who. This is a Patrick Troughton second Doctor edition. You're going to do more.
Volume 2. I've done 8 illustrations, full page hand-drawn illustrations for volume 3, which is Pertwee. Volume 2, sorry, which is Pertwee. And I've already been sent a gorgeous photograph today of the Brontosaurus from Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And I've got some surprises in store. There's a lot more. This book is actually more fun. I'll be honest. It's more fun because there's going to be more props in it. There's more surviving. As you get closer and closer to the current, the end of the classic one, there's more and more. I mean, if you're in the museum, It happens in the museum. It just becomes more and more rich as you go through.
Do you think and there's a story for folks who may not know, the first Tom Baker story is called Robot.
Yeah,
and it has one of the greatest costumes I think that the series ever had with the
classic robot, classic sci-fi robot design. Full stop.
And that costume still exists. Do you think because it was such a favorite at exhibitions that's probably the only reason why it still exists?
That and absolutely, it's a great piece. Also, it was made of sheet aluminium.
Yes.
The only problem was, and that is nicely survived. However, bizarrely, I know Mike Tucker very well. He restored it for the Cardiff exhibition, and basically, get this, I'd seen it several times prior to that. Someone had painted it silver. Just go figure. And I always wondered, it's the giant robot. It looks cool, but doesn't quite look right. I never twigged why. I just knew. And then when Mike said, the first thing we had to do was take all the bits to pieces. And someone had spray painted it silver. I was like, good grief. So when you then saw it in Cardiff, in the experience, suddenly it was like back to that 70s when you first see it on screen. It looked just like it had walked out the bunker. It was fabulous piece of work.
It is, and I think that's the best part about it is it's reflective. It looks like sheet metal. It does not look like plastic or wood or anything or rubber. Truly amazing.
Interestingly, inside it, there's no actual structure. It was all held together by the bending of the strips and riveted. All the strips were riveted. It's very clever. And then why it needed restoring predominantly was that it was flopping, and that's because the only thing giving structure was foam. And the foam had just deteriorated, so they just had to take it to bits, basically clean all the silver paint off, new foam, bang, back in business, and it looked as good as new.
Poor Michael Kilgariff, who
I can't imagine.
Every time he's been in the series, it's been some sort of monster that's like he did the original cyber controller, the current cyber controller, and then that. Okay, so in the museum itself.
Yeah.
Do you have a cutoff in terms of I'm only looking at classic series? Are you bringing in any new series stuff as well?
Okay. Bottom line is this, right? I love classic Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I'm going to be as far. I mean, people know this who know me very well. I don't look at 2005 onwards as the same show.
Okay.
It's Doctor Who kind of in name. It's got the symbols of Doctor Who, but I think for me, they changed too much for me. Now that's not saying it's a bad show. That's not saying I don't like some episodes. It's just I can't. There's not the same vibe and magic for me, But that's not saying. I was a teacher. And I had a Doctor Who club, and I had children, and I saw them love the new show. I'm not knocking it in that way at all. But for me, the Doctor Who was never a boyfriend. He was always a mentor, almost like Gandalf. Really, he was a different sort of figure, But that's personal taste. But the reality is. I got very kindly, I was gifted by Graham Harper, visited the museum a couple of times, and he gifted me the Cyber Leader head from Doomsday.
Oh, nice.
And it's the one worn by Paul Casey. It's the black handle, it was used throughout, which was very grateful of him. He loved the museum and it was very kind of him. Now that made me think, okay, I have a small display at the end because I recognize there's a lot of people come in and they want to see new Who. But the reality, I think I've got a reputation now, I think certainly in the UK, that I've been spending all my life really now restoring old monsters. And I'm quite happy now to champion the classic eras. That's where my passion is. So my cutoff, really, just to my right here, is my Curse of Fenric and the Destroyer and things like that. All that stuff's there. And Sophie Alder's become a good friend of the museum as well. Basically, it's like that is really my official cutoff. But I now have one little area where I've got a load of heads, originals from the new show, which I like, but I like them as much as I like other artifacts from other programs. Do you know what I mean? Like I've got bits from, say, Spectral or of other films, which, because I've got a half and half, 50% general sci-fi. Basically, I could not, for copyright, open a purely Doctor Who exhibition. So it's 50-50. But that's made, I think, the museum more interesting to the general public. But ultimately, I kind of look at the new Doctor Who pieces with interest, and they're beautifully made. Don't get me wrong; they're good. MFX really knew the stuff, but I don't have that same love because I wasn't a child then. I was by that point a cynical adult, or slightly cynical. So I didn't have that lens. I was looking through a different lens through the show. So I have a love affair with the original program. So it's really a love letter to classic Who and that classic Doctor Who exhibition in the 70s. That's what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely. And I do like parts of the new series, but I find when it comes for me to go and revisit, rewatch, honestly, it's always from 1963 to 1989, hands down, without a doubt.
There's a magic. I know it's an overused word, but I think there's an innocence and a charm to it, which I know someone will say, "Oh no, they kill a lot of people in it." Well, yeah, they do, but there's a sort of. I like the non-sexual aspect of the Doctor. I like the fact he's a friend to all. He's not bogged down by those sorts of issues. And I just like that. I like the fact he felt like almost the dad I didn't sort of quite have. It was that sort of
right.
Do it was this feeling? It was very safe, and everybody was his friend. It didn't matter. He wouldn't fancy you. He would treat you all the same.
Yeah,
and that is lost, I think, in the new show. But that's, some people prefer that, and that's absolutely fine. But I just find it stylistically so different that I find the classic years is definitely a demarcation point between them.
I totally understand. Why don't we go ahead? Let's take our next break here. When we come back, we're going to finish up our conversation with Neil Cole. I'm enjoying this. I hope you are too, because it's such a great conversation about props and everything in general. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with MetamorphosisConnections.com. MetamorphosisConnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search MetamorphosisConnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on MetamorphosisConnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting MetamorphosisConnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's MetamorphosisConnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
Lilliput in Coon Rapids dares you to take part in their Haunted Mansion escape room. 100 years ago, a family suffered a tragic incident. Your team is brought in to find out what happened that night, find proof of the supernatural, and help the spirits find peace. Are you up for the task? This incredible escape room is filling up fast, so book now. Also, a perfect outing for work team building. Go to lilliput.net now to book your experience today. Greg Bakun here. Like many of you, I still collect physical books, and not just any books, but books about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. I go to Megas Books and Herbs, located in the Arts District of Minneapolis, but books are only part of it. Megas Books and Herbs offers crystals, jewelry, herbs, oils, and consultations on how to use this stuff. Check out their in-store classes and events too. This place has everything to expand your horizons. Located at 1848 Central Avenue, Minneapolis, or visit megasbooks.com.
This is Chad, owner of AM950. Recently, I had a large order of custom designed t-shirts that needed to be turned around in a hurry. I knew exactly who to call. Grady Gear Company. Grady Gear Company is a local company that handles large and small custom clothing and apparel orders. I had a lot of questions from color, shirt quality, and what sizes we needed. Grady Gear Company was great to work with. They got us what we needed on time, and now everybody's looking great around the station in their new gear. Start your order at GradyGearCo.com.
Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville. And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We're going to go back to paranormal. Don't worry, folks. This isn't turned into a complete Doctor Who radio show, though I could easily do that. But tomorrow we're going to have on C.L. Thomas. We're going to be talking about something she does, which is called spirit art. We're going to find out what that is. We're going to talk about it, and they'll be open up for your questions. And then on Wednesday, we do one-question readings with the return of Refined Divine. We're going to have that Wednesday as always. That's always a lot of fun. So if you have a question you want answered about your future, about a loved one, or you want her to channel someone, that's going to be a great opportunity to do so. Thursday, Thanksgiving, and then Friday afterwards, we are off both those days. We'll be running best of episodes, so still, you got to tune in. There's always just a great wealth of interviews that we have that we'll be playing over Thursday and Friday. This is one of them. And we are talking with Neil Cole. He is the creator and also the curator of the Museum of Classic Sci-Fi, and is at Osborne House in Allendale, Northumberland. Where is that exactly? I'm trying to figure out where that is, Neil.
Right. Okay. The easiest way of thinking about it is everybody generally, especially from the States, if they're in the north of England, they go to the Roman Wall.
Yes.
We are 20 minutes from the Roman Wall. Basically, my wife and I go for a coffee once a week for a beautiful cafe that looks over the Roman Wall. So 20 minutes from the Roman Wall, and a little bit down from us is the Lake District. So it's a gorgeous part of the world, and an unusual place for Doctor Who museum without any doubt. But it's and also in terms of east and west, it's halfway between the cities of Carlisle and Newcastle. That makes any sense.
It makes sense to me. I've been out to the UK many times, but I actually tend to stay more over the Birmingham area, and so that's
called. I class that as Midlands.
Yes.
Some people call Manchester the North, and it's like, really, that ain't North, mate. That just ain't North. North is where we are, you know.
Right. No. And I'm hoping to get out there again. It's been a few years, but I don't know if you're familiar with Kaleidoscope and the British Heritage, British Television Heritage. So I work with them on a lot of stuff.
Brilliant.
So, but we're talking about this wonderful museum, and and I did read about that visitation mask in the work, and because there was a tragedy over at was it Blackpool or Longleat? I'm sorry, the fire.
Yes, right. Basically, a lot of the restoration work I've done, and you might catch a glimpse of the pterodactyl if you've got Netflix. I'm on Netflix on Amazing Interiors episode 3. You'll see the start of the museum project there, and I think you catch the pterodactyl on that. A lot of the actual props and costumes, some of them, came from the Longleat exhibition, and I think it was 96 or 7. There was a K9's engine motor went on fire, and various quite well-known pieces, including the pterodactyl, things got burnt to bits. Some of the saddest one was the pterodactyl android, which still exists, but it's in tremendously burnt form. I nearly managed to bid on that at an auction. I wish I'd got it, because I would have loved to work tonight, because I love that story. I absolutely adore the visitation. I think it's a great story. But there's pieces in here that I now can spot Longleat fire damage it has a certain look on what it did to the rubber. And where I've thought sometimes the rubber has been perished, it's not. It's smoke damage. One of the cases that taught me the most was I have an Exelon head from Death of the Daleks, and it was in the exhibitions for years. It was a perennial. You'd see that head pop up everywhere, and suddenly it appeared dark brown, right? And I just thought, it must be its rubber's, it's finally perished. I thought it was just rubber aging, and it had lost its lenses. Of course, when Mike Tucker came and visited, he said, "No, man, that was in the fire, smoke damage, and the lenses just melted off." And if you look in the pits of the eyes, you'll just see a little bit of the original cream paint.
Oh, wow.
And the Garm, for example, the Garm was a survivor. I mean, I love the Garm. I restored him. But his ears have got a crisping to it, and it's like a pattern. And it's smoke damage, and it was, rather than fire, it was actually the smoke that did most of it. And the pteroleptil, which is standing behind me in my little avatar picture, I resculpted the face on that and had to resculpt. It was a big job. And I also have got underneath that, I've got the green animatronic leader head, as worn by Michael Melia, and that had actually taken a big hit, and it had lost all the skin from its jaw. So what I did with that is I resculpted the jaw, resculpted the neck, and I left it white, the clay. And I thought, right, I'm actually going to leave the bit I've done to show that that's the restored bit. It's always a funny line restoring props, because on the one, like, for example, another one, I've got Michael Wisher's original Davros mask here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the actual original mask, or rather what's left of it. And you can still see the brow, the top of the head. What's really nice is you've got the blue paint has stuck on from the bar, and it's got the little electrical light still peeping through, the light, but the actual thing. Now, that was in such bad condition. Now, I could have resculpted the face completely. I've sculpted that before. But I just thought, well, all that's going to happen is it's going to be a mishmash of my work, and where's the original now? So instead, I was very lucky. A guy called Gavin Rymill had a cast of the original head from the mold of Wisher's mask, and he sent me. I said, "Could you send me a fiberglass copy?" And then what I did is I've arranged the pieces around the head. So again, and that's the sort of exhibit, Greg, that some people will see and go, "Oh, it just looks like a bit, like lots of bits." But to someone who knows what it is, that is Michael Wisher's, that's one of the most important masks, arguably, in the show, in the show's history, so you've got pieces like that. And so it's a mishmash of things, but that Longleat fire was it was devastating to the sort of stock of collections that was still with us, and some disappeared altogether. And finally, there was another huge disaster happened to the prop collection. Some went to New Zealand when the BBC sold them off. It went to a little museum in New Zealand. There was a flood in the museum, and all those props that were previously in Blackpool and Llangollen, that's it. They were lost. So these things happen occasionally, it's just history gone, really. You know.
Yeah. And like in the Longleat too, that also is arguably one of the best special effects sequences ever. The Trial of a Time Lord opened with that wonderful Time Lord spaceship that was completely destroyed in that fire. I know that.
I know the chap who has the molds for the model, and there's people recasting it and making a new version. It's interesting because I talked to Rob Alsop about the molds that, like he had the molds for the Mind Robber. And I thought it's funny because he's offered to give me one of the heads, to pull one out of the Clockwork. And obviously I'd love that. But it's funny because that's not the original. And it's almost like the mold is like the halfway process between the sculptor's hand and the prop itself. And so obviously getting something with, the classic, screen use lineage, from the mold is obviously very good. But the mold itself now has become, in that instance, and the same with the Trial of a Time Lord spaceship, it's these molds that are now the closest. They're the link to the actual show, which is quite interesting. I'd never looked at molds in such a serious way before, but that's,
Have you ever considered, or do you do this for maybe one of the ways to present some of the props is like you have a mole on display, you show a version that's taken from the mold, and you finish, and there's another one that's like a finished version or something like that.
Funny you should say that, Greg, because with Mestor, I got Mestor, and Mestor had, again, fire damage. I managed to repair the face. Basically, it had lost its fine details, the fine detail, delicate detail on the frills. So I sculpted that back in. It had lost its color. Again, I thought, why is it this color? Smoke damage. That's why it's this color. So basically, I repainted it. The costume wasn't in bad nick. I replaced an arm, which is another story. I managed to track down another original Mestor arm. What's the chances of that?
Right, exactly.
yeah. Anyway, so I did, and then, literally having finished months and months of work restoring that blasted head, a chap Dan contacts me and says, "Present in the post, 2 original pulls from the time of Mestor," and he literally sent me 2 surviving foam casts taken in 1984-5 of Mestor. I was like, what? I mean, obviously they weren't screen used, but what they've actually got is they've actually got Edwin Richfield's lower jaw still in the mold, and then in the other half of the mask has got the top part of his face. So I have actually placed those next to the screen used Mestor.
That's great.
And it's a nice, if I have kids around the museum, I say, look, that's the first half of the mask, and you had to combine it with that half of the mask, and and it's so that is the one example I have of that in the museum.
And Edwin Richfield was the actor who played Mestor in a story called The Twin Dilemma. One of the greatest, those strangest things is someone of Edwin Richfield's stature as an actor.
Yes,
and they make him basically this snail.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And it's you know what? Again, another thing I'm going to say. My life in this museum is weird. The chap who made the costume, right? Not Imagineering who made the shell, right? The guy who made the suit sent me Polaroids, which had never been seen, of Mestor's costume. And when it was photographed properly, the tail really stretches out, like it's a slug's tail does. Well, they just sort of huddled that up. So he just looked like a man in a sleeping bag,
He did.
Looked rather silly. When I saw the full costume as it was meant to be, I thought, wow, that's actually pretty cool. But it was never filmed like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And then the other daft thing was Mestor in exhibition never looked right. Again, you sort of like think, oh, it's Mestor. You look a bit sad. And then I repaired him and repositioned the arms. And I suddenly realized the arms are in, they're fixed in. Damn it. What they've done is, if you look on screen, his arms are up all the time. And in exhibition, they had them down. So it looks like he's slumped and down. And I just thought, that was my chance to reset the arms. But anyway, it is what it is. But I just wish I put the damn arms upwards, because that's how he's always portrayed, and it would have looked more like Mestor,
Well, it was something that you said earlier about Bob Richardson talking about how, you're presenting these much better than they did. And you're right. I can imagine being a young child going and seeing him in person, being blown away. But you're right. The pictures would be like nothing was really, they were staged, but they looked like they were dead when they were staged. So everything that was more humanoid was slumped over, even Cybermen, the masks weren't on right. Yeah.
A good example of that, I managed to get the Cryon, the surviving complete Cryon from, and that's that. I've got the Cyber Scout, the original Cyber Scout, and I've got the Cryon beside the Cyber Scout. And that Cryon, it had always looked ill, in the museums and in the exhibitions. It looked deathly. And when I took it to bits, because I thought, right, I've got to get it standing upright. It wasn't even on a proper mannequin. It was on Susan Hampshire's dress stand, right? Actor, famous English actress.
Yep.
It had Susan Hampshire. It was on like the lower bottom, and then it was just like a stuffed lump of pillow. So it was like always, I'm pulling a shape here. You can't see it, unfortunately. But it was like, it just looked like a misshapen doll. So the first thing I did was I got like a decent, very slim mannequin. And it's just immediately, it's like, wow, it actually has a female figure again. It's actually got a waist and, arms. It just looks a hell of a lot better just for doing that.
It's incredible. And Susan Hampshire never even appeared in Doctor Who. So
just a BBC stock frame. In you go, bang.
Probably from Forsyte Saga then, or Palliser.
Yeah. And it was lovely to see that. I was like, whoa, Susan Hampshire's flipping dress stand or whatever it is,
it's incredible.
And then the cloak that was on that as well, I thought is this the cloak that Faith Brown wore? As last? No, it was just a curtain. Someone in exhibitions at some point had just got a curtain and wrapped it around. It was just a bog standard curtain.
It's amazing, and it's amazing how they made things do. I just remember Sarah Jane's costume, her outfit in Five Doctors, and you actually see it in Are You Being Served as stock to be sold, like in the
I
Grace
didn't see
Brothers.
that. Was it really?
Yeah, it was. And then,
wow!
like
I didn't
later,
know that.
You look and you're like, oh my God, come on, really? Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. As we're getting close to the end of the program today, first of all, how can people get a hold of you, just to, let alone if they can't make it out to the UK and visit, how can they experience you online?
Well, if you just go to the museumofclassicsci-fi.com, you'll see the museum page. If you want to get a DVD professionally made by Real Time Pictures, there's a couple of titles. The one that's on there, The Monster Man, and also Doctor on Display, which is the history of Doctor Who exhibitions. That's on Time Travel TV. That's Keith Barnfather's company, Real Time Pictures. There's 2 really high quality docs with Sophie Aldred. She came to the museum and presented them all. And again, on Facebook, I keep like a daily blog, almost daily blog. That is Neil Cole's Adventures in Science Fiction on Facebook. Please like that, because I really appreciate it. And I'm on Instagram, which is, again, Museum of Classic Sci-Fi. And again, that's like, was it Classic Sci-Fi Museum? It's that kind of thing. But basically, I try to keep a blog. The whole point of the museum, Greg, is sharing this stuff. I don't want it locked away in private rooms for 1 or 2 people to go, look what I've got. It's open all year round for everybody. Just as I, as a kid, got to see that Blackpool exhibition, I want kids to be able to come and afford it. It's cheap, hopefully cheap to get in. It's there for everyone to come and see. That's the point. And
too, maybe you get some people who are inspired by what you're doing and want to get into that industry themselves. You know,
I've actually had 2 of my ex-pupils came and helped me as a who were in my Doctor Who club at school. One now works on Doctor Who in the props department, and the other is a professor of satellite technology, believe it or not, and he renovated the Thunderbirds flight chair from the Thunderbirds movie for me. And it's just lovely, because it's just, these are kids who were, 11, and now they came and wanted to help me out, and it was just delightful. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. We're out of time, but Neil, thank you so very much. Fantastic conversation. We'll be back tomorrow with C.L. Thomas and Spirit Art. Everyone, have a fantastic night.